Okay, welcome to the class, everyone. And we are going to speak about the parsha Pekudei, parsha about the Mishkan. In fact, this is the last parsha of the book of Shmos, which in hindsight, we can understand that this is the culmination of the book of Exodus. Exodus starts off with the idea of the traverse of the experience that the Jews have in Egypt and how they overcome that, receive a constitution at the Mount Sinai, and then build an edifice to Hashem, the Mishkan. And they actually donate all the articles. And our parsha, the last parsha of the book of Exodus, concentrates on the idea that the Mishkan is actually built. Our sages say about the first lines of the parsha, which is Exodus 38, verse 21, starts off and says, Ele Pekudei ha-Mishkan. These are the accounts of the Mishkan, and then says, and repeats the word, repeats the word Mishkan, Mishkan ha'edos, the Mishkan of testimony that was calculated according to Moshe's instructions and was built according to Moshe's instructions. The commentators question and ask something about this parsha, Pekudei, and they discuss relative to last week's parsha, V'yakol, and the getting of the donations to build the Mishkan, to build the Tabernacle, and the actual implementation of building of the building of the Mishkan. And we inquire and we say, why does the verse have this double expression? Eila Pekudei ha-Mishkan, Mishkan ha'edos. As we translated it, these are the accounts of the Mishkan of the testimony. Why repeat the word Mishkan? But in fact, this idea, this question needs to be answered about the whole parsha, about this whole section. And in fact, not just this section, but in previous week's section. We've already heard about, prior to last week's section, this week's section, we've already heard about the Mishkan. Moses, when he came down from Har Sinai, described what had to be done in various of the parshas, various of the sections prior to this. So why in this week's parsha and last week's parsha have we reiterated all the details, all the aspects of the Torah? We know that the Torah in general, the Torah counts every single letter, and our sages spend a lot of effort understanding every single word, every single letter in the written Torah, and they weigh it and they examine it and they ask what is the meaning of any extra letter, any extra word. And in fact, we build equivalent mounds of Torah law, halacha, about any extra letters or missing letters. And here in this particular case, we've got an entire episode of instructions, of details, of aspects which relate to the Mishkan, very openly repeated. We seem to be repeating all the details about the activity, about the building of the Mishkan and the components of the Mishkan. And then after all that detail which we read in various other parshas, we come to the last two parshas, the last two sections of the book of Exodus, the book of Shmos, and we find that the details are repeated. Parshas Truma and Parshas Tetzaveh was originally the discussion of what was commanded. As it says, this is what Moses was commanded, and he passed it on. He passed it on, this information of the Jewish nation, and we were told that the Jewish people should donate, give of their own heart, objects, resources, copper, silver, gold, precious stones for the purposes of the Mishkan. That were in the parshas Truma B'Tzava. So here in our parsha, last week's parsha V'Yakel, this week's parsha Pekudei, we hear all that detail again. It's all written out. If the purpose of the Torah was to somehow say that that people gave it and they've done the exact work that they were supposed to do exactly as God commanded, surely we could have summarized it and it would have been sufficient to say that the children of Israel did as they were commanded, and they built the Mishkan according to the commandments of Hashem. Why is it necessary to repeat everything again? Well, this question itself, we have a similar question, and we've had similar question like this in other parashas. At the time of in the parshas Nosei, where we hear about the idea that after Moshe Rabbeinu builds the Mishkan, we hear about that the 12 princesses of each tribe, they bring their specific korban, their specific sacrifices, and they bring it in front of Hashem. They bring their objects that they're presenting to and for the purposes of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And in fact, when we examine the detail over there, we find that the actual korbanos are actually the same. When you look at the detail, we find that they actually gave the same thing. But nevertheless, the Torah, in its reporting of it, in the narrative, repeats every detail over again of what each prince of Israel, each head of each tribe gave, one after the other, 12 times. It's repeated, and we ask the question on that, and the answer that we find in relationship to that is that really, although they did bring physical items which were exactly the same, but their intention, their kavanah, their ideas and how they were connecting to God differed. They're different individuals, 12 from 12 different tribes, and their feeling towards Hashem, their inner meanings that they gave to the korbanos were different. Each head of a tribe had his own intent and his unique intent when he brought his korban. Therefore, we answer over there. We answer in those teachings. We answer the idea that the Torah can't repeat and say that this is in fact the one and the same thing, because they weren't one and the same. The truth is that they were, although the objects themselves looked similar, but they were brought with an intent that was totally different. The inner meaning of it, the inner desire of the princesses when they brought their korbanos, when they brought their presents, were different. This idea that there is this expression of individuality in something that looks physically the same, we can use this idea and answer our question. Our question is about why is the parsha repeating the details over again? We can understand it as following and answer that question that we started initially with, or the aspect that we noted. The beginning of the parsha says, Eile Pekudei Mishkan, Mishkan Ha'edes. We mentioned the word Mishkan twice. Why do we mention the Mishkan? Why do we mention the word Mishkan twice? Because in fact, the Mishkan of the first mention and the Mishkan of the second Mishkan aren't exactly the same. In what way? The Mishkan that Hashem commanded that the Jews build and put together is a different Mishkan than what the children of Israel actually built in actuality. Meaning, it only from the point of view of an outside viewer, only in relationship to the outside do they look the same. But the essence, the inner aspect of the Mishkan was twofold. There are two Mishkans. And in fact, these two mentions of the word Mishkan twice implies, as we said, that there are two Mishkans, there are two tabernacles, there are two Mishkan, which is the aspects which the Mishkan was built, the tabernacle. They're two different tabernacles, meaning, what does this mean in actuality? Their essence was different. The expression is, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. These are the Pekudei HaMishkan, these are the accounts of the Mishkan. And with the twice mentioning of the Mishkan, they hint to the idea of two Mishkanas. There is a spiritual Mishkan and there is a physical Mishkan. The first Mishkan was spiritual, is spiritual. And in fact, this is what Hashem showed Moshe when he was on Har Sinai. When Hashem asked and showed Moshe Rabbeinu the results of his commandments and showed him what he wants and how he wants the Mishkan to be built, that Mishkan which was shown to Moshe Rabbeinu is a Mishkan which originates on Mount Sinai. Hashem came down from the heavens and he showed Moshe Rabbeinu a vision. And he said, like this, it shall be built. True, Hashem told him it has to be built out of silver, gold, acacia wood, all the different components. But the way Hashem commanded it, that the Mishkan should be, and the way Moshe Rabbeinu, the most spiritual being who is the interface between the Jewish nation and Hashem, the way he heard it, and the way he understood it, and the way he saw it on Mount Sinai, in Har Sinai, in the cloud, in the cloud which Hashem opened up for him. The vision that he saw, that he saw was not a physical Mishkan, but he saw the spiritual counterparts. He saw the spiritual nature of the Mishkan and all its components. When we talked about gold, we talk about the fear of Hashem. When we talk about the silver, we talk about the love of Hashem. What Moshe Rabbeinu saw was the spiritual equivalence of the Mishkan. He might have even seen he saw the image of the Mishkan, but what he mainly saw was the spiritual nature of it. And that's what happened at Har Sinai, and that's the discussion in the previous parshas. But in our parsha, our parsha, which is our parshas, which we can say the last two parshas, Pekudei, where the way the book of Exodus completes, building the spiritual edifice, the spiritual home for God in this world, that speaks about a physical Mishkan. That speaks about a well understood item built out of physical identities. This building, what the Bnei Yisrael have to build and built, the Mishkan, in this physical world, that is built out of physical objects that transform the physical objects in the world into something spiritual. Now, even though the Mishkan itself, being that it's a spiritual object, and that what Hashem showed to Moshe at Har Sinai, there's no doubt that spiritual edifice that Moshe Rabbeinu was shown is much higher and much more elevated than what the Mishkan that the Bnei Yisrael actually built in a physical sense. Nevertheless, Hashem wants a dwelling place in this physical world. Hashem wants a meeting place for him and the Jewish nation via the Mishkan. And therefore the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence in this world, wants something here in a physical sense. And therefore, when it says at the end of parshas, when it says in the end of our parsha, we speak about that Moshe Rabbeinu had all the work completed, or all the work was completed. It meant in a physical sense. And after all that work was completed, the cloud of glory entered the tent of meeting. That the cloud of glory covered over the Ohel Moed, the place of meeting, and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan. And that is dafka, that is through the Mishkan being built in a physical sense. But our parsha goes through a more interesting aspect in that it teaches us that to bring godliness into the world, it is done, and it can be done through a twofold method, through a method of spirituality and then physicality. This is reflected in Hashem's name. In the name of Hashem, spelled Yud Hey Vav Hey, the Yud and the Hey refers in the mystical realm to the higher unrevealed aspects of Hashem, while the Vav Hey, the last two letters of Hashem's name, show us how Hashem becomes elongated and presence in the world by virtue of the letter of Vav being an elongated letter. It implies to us that Hashem shows his benefits and brings down his glory from the upper realms to the lower realms, like the letter Vav. And the letter Hey, it has got width, and it shows that the idea that Hashem is revealed in this world to the way that we can see him. This, in fact, was also reflected by the giver of the Torah. Hashem gave the Torah by Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu himself was a child that was born, and that child that was born, as we know, the Midrash tells us that he was a premature baby, and therefore, in that he was born premature, he could be hidden from the authorities who were looking for the male-born children and they wanted to kill all the male-born children. So he was hidden away for a 3-month period, and then only afterwards did he become revealed. And then as the narrative continues, he was taken into the Pharaoh's house. But that is to say that Moshe, the giver of the Torah, went through a passage of being hidden and then revealed. Being in a hidden sense, like like the world being hidden, like the godliness being hidden from the world, and then coming out in a state of revelation. This is also the same idea as we have of the Mishkan. The Mishkan first mentioned, the Mishkan as it's first mentioned in our week's parsha, and then the second idea of the Mishkan, the second mention of the Mishkan. What is the second? How is the first Mishkan and the second Mishkan differentiated in the verse? The verse says Pekudei Mishkan Mishkan. The second reference to the Mishkan is called the Mishkan of testimony. When do you need something which is something of testimony? When some fact is hidden, and therefore and then becomes revealed. So also the Mishkan itself became revealed. So it went from the stage of being hidden to the stage of being revealed. Similarly, with Moshe Rabbeinu was hidden away for 3 months. In fact, the building of the Mishkan, this Mishkan, which we mentioned, of the building in Parshas Pekudei, and its actual inauguration was there was a period of time where this Mishkan was hidden as well, in a physical sense. The Mishkan was put together, all the components were joined together, and then after 3 months, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, was put away, packed away, till its inauguration time, 3 months later. So that it also, the Mishkan itself, our Mishkan, which we talk about, it's Eilo Pekudei Mishkan. These reference to the Mishkan also was hidden away, and this highlights this repetition of the idea of the two aspects of the temple of the Mishkan. Follows these two dimensions, as we said, that's reflected in God's name, as well as reflected in the giver of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, and to the ones till eventually it becomes from being hidden to something being revealed. So therefore, our verse clearly, the verse of Eilo Pekudei Mishkan is referencing two components within that same Mishkan, the hidden aspect, the heavenly hidden aspect of it, and the revealed aspect made out of physical components, in the similar way that the princesses of the tribes, when they gave their sacrifices, their component part of the inauguration of the Mishkan, when they brought their sacrifices, they brought it with something that looked the same, but with a spiritual hidden intention that was different one from each other. So in that same idea, we're expressing over here that the Torah has to rewrite over the portions of Yaakov Pekudei, because this is the Mishkan as it exists in a differentiated way, in a physical way, not just in a spiritual level of its existence, but in a physical sense. And therefore, this refers to the two aspects of godliness: an aspect of godliness that we see that is hidden, that we can't comprehend, that is beyond us, and then an aspect of godliness we see in the physical world, in all the great spiritual and wonders that exist in the world, which come from godliness. One more manifest, one revealed, one hidden. So therefore, the Mishkan itself, as we said, and the descriptions relating to it are repeated in the two parshas, in our parsha, and in particular implemented in our parsha. So even though the Mishkan itself was the spiritual Mishkan, which, as we've hinted to, is a much more higher spiritual entity. Nevertheless, Hashem dwells and wants to dwell in our physical Mishkan. Hashem wants to dwell in the physical world and to partner with us in a physical sense with us together. And that's only after Moshe Rabbeinu completed all the buildings of the Mishkan, and as expressed in chapter 40 and in verse number 30, that it talks about that it was finally completed, and the tent and the glory of Hashem entered in, and then the verses continue, and then this is how the cloud of glory in verse 34, it speaks about how the cloud of glory filled the entire area of the Mishkan, because it's only through the physical embodiment of the spiritual Mishkan do we actually fulfill Hashem's will. This is the idea of mitzvahs. This is the idea of commandments. The commandments are not to be fulfilled in some sort of spiritual sense alone, but it's to be completed and completed and done in a physical sense, not just a spiritual sense, but in a physical sense, so that we can complete and implement Hashem's desire in this physical world to its completion. And from this, we learn an absolute marvelous teaching for every single person. As we said, the Nasiim, the princesses of the tribe, they were all different, although they physically brought the same, meaning we can have human beings and we all look the same, but we are all individuals internally, and we all have our own different challenges and different ways of implementing our connection to Hashem through what the processes and methods as defined in the Code of Jewish Law. But this teaches us that, in fact, we shouldn't think that just because I don't do the same actions as the next one, we shouldn't regard any individual's actions as not as good as the next person, because everybody's got the same everybody's got that same potential and capabilities, and certainly in their spiritual sense they are connected, because a person can think to himself, how can I, with my constrained capabilities, whatever they might be, how can I make a connection and give pleasure to God? How do I know that I'm fulfilling and completing my mission to God? So the Torah teaches us from these parshas of the last two parshas, the last two sections of the book of Exodus, where the book of Exodus is really a culmination of the going out of Egypt, because we build the Mishkan, which is the dwelling place for Hashem in this world. We can say to ourselves, it's just because we're actually in the physical world and doing physical mitzvahs, and we're doing the activities that Hashem desires by fulfilling the mitzvahs, the commandments that he's given us, we are completing and we are building our own personal Mishkan. We are completing and building our own personal edifice, our place where we connect to Hashem, as our sages and the commentaries explain to us, that within our own essence and our own bodies, we correspond to the Mishkan itself, and in particular, as it says, that our heart is like the altar. We give of our heart to Hashem. So a person shouldn't think, who am I and how can I cause a connection and a pleasure to Hashem? So the Torah teaches us that in fact, for sure we can, just by doing the physical mitzvahs and fulfilling Hashem's will, we are causing and giving Hashem pleasure, because his will is being completed and done. And it's only us in the physical sense, only us human beings, not the angels, not the souls which are in heaven. They can't do physical activity. It's only the people who reside, human beings, the Jews who reside in this physical world, human beings in general. They're capable of cleaning and preparing and making the realm of physicality a more spiritual place, and bring to fruition the ultimate goal of the beginning of the book of Exodus, the idea of true freedom to the soul, by making that connection to Hashem, that we don't have any constraints, and we can meet God in his Mishkan, in our own hearts, and we can meet him, and we can make a dwelling place for him below in this physical world. I hope that this is a lesson that we can all take to heart and give us strength in this time, in trying times, and that we can find strength in that and go forward with simcha, with joy, and we will greet Hashem in the period of Mashiach's coming, and we'll be able to complete the Nachas Ruach and the building of the Mishkan in a sense of physicality in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a good evening.